if you're not falling down when you're water skiing, you're not trying hard enough. And the same thing when you're developing new technologies and trying to implement those technologies. You know, it may not work the first time, but did you learn something? And can you leverage that knowledge? I worked for a gentleman years ago, and he had a lot to do with who I am today. And he expected us to fail 50% of the time. We were in a real research environment, and we were looking for the bleeding edge, not the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge. And we were expected to fail. And so, don't be scared of failure. If you're not failing a bunch of times, you're not pushing the boundaries and you're not trying to learn more. And so I can't tell you how often I've failed in my life, but it's a considerable number. And I learned a lot from that. And I would encourage anybody who is trying to build high developing teams, high performing teams, that you got to fail sometimes to learn those lessons. And
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Jim McFarlane. Jim is the Executive Vice President of Strategic Robotic Systems in San Diego, a company that builds specialized underwater vehicles called Fusion. He assumed full leadership of the business in January 2024, after spending his entire life, since the age of 8, working on or under the water. With decades of experience in the undersea space, James brings a unique perspective to leadership and innovation. Under his guidance, the company has undergone a dramatic transformation. His leadership philosophy centers on enabling his team, bringing solutions rather than problems, and collaboratively working through challenges. Today, he'll share insights from his remarkable journey in technology and leadership. It's a pleasure for me to have Jim on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Jim.
thank you very much for having me, Ty. It's an honor.
Absolutely. So I always start here with this question. Every leader, every human, of course, has a beginning. I've found that who we are as leaders at work and in life starts taking shape long before we advance to any executive position of leadership. I'm curious, who is someone from your early life or an early experience that you feel really shaped the kind of leader and person that you are today?
Well, I guess the fundamental question would have to be answered with my father. I mean, he was a pioneer in the subsea technology space, and that's how I got stuck in an underwater vehicle at the age of 8 and taken to the bottom of the ocean. So I started working with him at that age, actually, sweeping shop floors and working my way up through the business. And that gave me my formation, shall we say.
That's amazing. I'm curious if you'd be, able to share a story or a little bit more about your father and the impact. Of course, even just giving you access to those experiences from such a young age is super formative in terms of your passion about the undersea space. How about him as an influence on your leadership?
Well, he was a Navy lieutenant commander in the Canadian Navy. He was in charge of building the Canadian Oberon class submarines between 1967, 66, 67, and 68 in Chatham dockyards in London, England. And I went across with them during that period of time. When he came back to Canada, migrated out to the west coast to Vancouver, British Columbia, where we joined a little company called International Hydrodynamics. He was the vice president of engineering there, and that's where I got a chance to start sweeping floors and watch how vehicles were put together, and watched how he built teams and how he brought the right people in to, really do things that nobody had done before. And that evolved into, of course, starting his own business, which was really one of the starting points of underwater robotics with ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, back in the early 70s.
Well, it sounds like a really inspiring story, and I'm imagining that we might hear more about your dad as we continue on through this conversation, which, of course, this podcast, we're exploring really the essence of leadership, true leadership. Right? Of course, that term, true leadership, is going to mean different things to different people. What does true leadership mean to you, and what makes a true leader in your eyes?
For me, it's about making sure that you give people the opportunity to show themselves, give them the tools to do what they need to do, make sure that you've got a structure that's supportive and, you know, really spend the time to listen to what they need and understand their roadmap. What is it that drives them and makes them enthusiastic and understand that there's a sense of urgency in getting to the end goal of producing whatever product it might be. Undersea vehicles is a very passionate kind of business. You'll find the people that get involved in this have spent a fair bit of time in this space, and you know, one of the things that keeps people going is the motivation of being able to see new things and develop new toys. And so I try to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm really curious. It's something that comes up here often in these conversations, is that capacity to, for lack of a better term, like buy in or choose in to something, so that we really cultivate or capture the energy that people have towards a thing. I've heard you speak a little bit to it already. It's about listening, but I'm curious, when you think about getting people to buy in or choose it or keep that motivation high, what's your approach to that?
Well, let's take, I've got a problem, okay? And I'm speaking as if I was somebody who was in the organization and I got a problem with something. In my position as the person trying to help them answer these problems, if you got a problem, bring a solution at the same time as you're bringing the problem. And I prefer that you bring a number of solutions. And then I try to bring all of the affected parties to the table where everybody understands what the problem is and everybody has an opportunity to bring their solutions. And then we sit and we talk about the pros and the cons of each one of those solutions and try to get to a point of consensus where everybody around the table understands the best way forward and agree on that path forward as a group. There's a lot of energy when you get everybody buying into a problem and finding a solution for that problem. And so I find consensus building within the organization and having the affected parties at the table really is a beneficial way of getting from, a problem position to something that's a successful position.
It's something that I feel like I hear so often in leadership, but it's something, unfortunately, that is a little bit more rare in practice, is the actual inviting people to bring solutions. And it does strike me that if we're talking about keeping people engaged, that having them utilize their own brain and their own ideas to think about, the ways that they would want to contribute to or move something toward, makes so much sense. So, of course, every leader faces moments that test and shape us. I'm curious if you can share about an experience, that really challenged you, maybe a turning point in your own leadership journey.
Well, that's a pretty broad question, and it encompasses a long time. I mean, when you're involved in the subsea business, there's a lot of different challenges, and you're under pressure, no pun intended, a lot of the time. And so, you know, when you're on the back deck of a ship 200 nautical miles in the middle of nowhere, and it's ODON 30, and the sun's coming up, and the waves are big, the challenge is making sure that you bring everybody home safely. And those leadership challenges on the back deck of a boat really making sure that you've built a team that is a cohesive team. And, you know, you have to exercise those capabilities on a regular basis. A high performing team on the back deck of a boat is sort of like ballet because you've got a number of different events that are going on at the same time. You've got the ship being positioned, then you've got this equipment that you're trying to put over the side of the ship, and you've got all the people on the back deck with heavy moving objects and sea states and things like that. So the challenge of, getting an operation to a place where it's safe and it's seamless and it looks effortless, um, is an effort that requires a lot of time with a lot of people, practicing those skills over and over again. And I've found that practicing those skill sets again and again in different types of business, different parts of the business, are things that allow you to develop a high performing team. And so the challenge is keeping everybody alive when you're on the back deck of a boat. The challenge in having a business that manufactures products is making sure that the operation is efficient and everybody knows where they should be in that operation and how you bring it through. So it's a very generic answer to a very difficult question across a lot of different areas.
Well, I'm glad I asked because it's leading me to a little bit more of a specific question because I'm really curious, especially, with the complexity of something like that, where you actually have lives, right, and in the balance. I'm curious. Part of what I heard you say is, making sure that you get the right folks on board in the first place. How, first of all, with the kind of team that you're putting together that has to have technical expertise and be a team player and all these sort of the things, what is it that you're looking for, high level? What is it that you're looking for that tells you that someone's going to be a good team player? And then how is it that you tell that they're going to be that good fit?
You know, we have a very diverse group of folks. We have mechanical, we have electrical, we have electronics, we have administrators, we have all the various food groups pertaining to the development of undersea technologies. And people need to be passionate about what they're involved in. And, some of the best people in the world have no passion. And how do you motivate them? How do you get them to understand a sense of urgency? I'm lucky. This business of undersea technology, um, it's a very interesting world to live in, dealing in inner space versus outer space, because 70% of the planet's covered by water. That's inner space to me. Um, and we really know less about the bottom of the ocean than we do about the moon, and so it's hard, it's a lot easier for me to find passionate people about that sort of mission, to get them involved in what we're doing. But that passion is important. Um, Finding people who have a sense of urgency, a sense of curiosity, like, how can we do this better? How can we improve upon things? People who ask the what if question. What if we did it this way? What if we did it that way? We certainly spend a lot of time making sure that there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you've got a question, ask the question. And that philosophy runs through this business. Everybody's encouraged to ask no matter what. If they don't know, ask. If you see something, say something. If you see something that doesn't seem right to you in the development of the system, ask. And so it's an interactive process. But we look for passion and urgency.
I love that. It strikes me, of course, if one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation, right, is encouraging folks to come with solutions and not answers. So it makes so much sense in that regard that you would find people that are passionate and that have that sense of urgency and then want to bring their ideas to the table. It's going to be a lot hard. It's going to be a lot easier of an ask for people to bring solutions when that piece is already taken care of. So, leadership, of course, is also what we pour into ourselves. Thinking about your own journey over the past few years as a leader, what's been the most valuable investment you've made in yourself, and what difference has it made in your leadership and personal growth?
Uh, Overcoming adversity when real challenges are put out in front of you, um, spending the time to just know that you can do it. When you get challenged, sometimes you don't know whether you can actually do something that you're faced with. And you know, in the world that I live in, it's a fairly small marketplace, shall we say. There's not a lot of people in the world who build underwater vehicles, and when things like COVID happened, a lot of the ships tied up at docks. And, there wasn't a lot of people going out to sea and doing things. The people who were at sea, they got stuck out there for 8, 10, 12 months, and there was no real crew changes and things like that. But for those of us who didn't happen to be out on a boat at that time, how do you make a living at what you do when nothing's going on? And it challenges you to find other things to do that may be outside your comfort zone. And by doing those sorts of things, you learn that maybe you've got broader capability than you might have um, thought you had previously.
Well, I love it, and certainly, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about about how often we uh, compare like or utilize the ocean or water as a metaphor for life, and I almost feel like we could probably have a separate whole long conversation about the relationship with the sea and the sea changes and changes in the tide and all of these things. We could draw wisdom from your experience in the ocean there. uh, Leadership, of course, is about what we're shaping for tomorrow. I've been really interested for this question with you, especially as you've taken the helm since 2024 at your new organization. What's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, or the impact that you really want to have in the years ahead?
I need to generate or cultivate the next generation of leadership. I've been at this for quite a while, and now it's time to start giving back to the community. I've been building and operating underwater vehicles for over 50 years now, and I've learned a little bit along the way about how to and how not to. And you speak about the oceans and what they mean to us. It's the cradle of life on this planet. And we have ocean acidification, we have plastics in the oceans, coral bleaching, temperature rise, and. The list of pressures that are being brought to that critical life environment for all of us who live here. It's got to be another generation, you know. I'm not getting any younger, as none of us are. Time doesn't stop for anybody, and developing the next generation is critical. And this is it's a journey, it's an adventure. But there are a lot of things that get learned along the way of how to versus how not to. And the ocean can be a very unforgiving environment, especially if you're getting into real depths. And therefore, making sure that the knowledge is passed down to the next generation so that they understand the lessons that have been learned, hard lessons that have been learned. You know, are leveraged in their thought process moving forward.
I think about that so much in the context of the world in general, and the necessity for us to pass wisdom from generation to generation, and specifically in your industry where it is so niche, right? Where it's so specific. And when you start thinking about uh, what goes with you when you go, and what I hear a bit in that is like legacy, right? And what I hear a bit in that is like, what is your responsibility? Not just what do you want to pass on that you've learned, but actually what do you need to pass on in order to ensure that the good work that you've poured your heart and your life into continues.
Yeah, I alluded to my father being a mentor, and he certainly was a very powerful and formative mentor in my life. But I've been blessed that I've had some pretty unique mentors in my life, and a lot of them are gone. I mean, I've only got, I think, one of my real mentors left out of, all of the people who really shaped me. And the lessons that they passed on to me, it's critical they get passed on to others. And it's not just ocean legacy, it's business legacy, it's how do you treat people legacy, it's, what's the right way to do things versus the wrong way to do things. And those lessons were hard learned, and they're important to the next generation. And you don't want to lose that knowledge base that those folks spent their lifetimes developing, and so that lore needs to get passed down from generation to generation.
Well, it's just essential. And the interesting thing about that is, it's not as simple as mm, transferring money from a bank account, or it like literally has to happen through relationships and conversations and direct experience. It is the accumulation of time there. So I really hear that. I'm curious, and especially given what we've talked about here, and given your vision for legacy and passing things on to future generations, thinking about all of that, what's your growing edge right now? In other words, like, what are the ways that you're currently being stretched or tested in your leadership or in life today?
How do you make a 36-hour day? It's time. I mean, things, technology is accelerating in its progression. We have tools today that I didn't have. I mean, I ask a computer to give me, a plan. I talk to some AI and I say, what do you think about this? And it spits out, a list of information. And we came from a world of, okay, I better sit down and think about this and what are all the opportunities, SWOT analysis and all that sort of stuff. But today it's easy to ask a question. And I think critical thought sometimes gets lost in the ease of being able to ask that question. And so you have so much time and you've got these questions that need to be answered, but you need to be able to maintain your connection with reality. And so, given those time constraints, given all of the easy way outs, maintaining your focus and maintaining, you know, do I really still have the pulse of the industry? Do I still understand the questions as they're truly being asked, without relying on these artificial knowledge bases that may not have the real foundation of understanding of what the problems are? And so, to me, that's a big challenge today is making sure that people are thinking without just asking a machine a question and, oh, that's the gospel truth, because that's not reality.
I'll tell you, Jim, you really just there articulated so much of. I'm imagining that anybody who hears that is going to resonate with what you just said. I can't speak for anybody else, but I'll say for me, you really just articulated really well the tension that I feel in, what's the trade-off of having this thing done really easy for me? Yes, I save some time, but what do I lose in the process with not actually having to wrestle or struggle with getting to that on my own, because it's not just the end product that I'm after, right? It's also becoming the person that got to that end product in the way that helps me, be like, I don't need to ask the answer or ask the question anymore. So it's an interesting thing, and I think you'll have me thinking in particular on that particular tension for a while. And I appreciate you for articulating it because it's already got me reflecting.
Well, there's an adage that I've used a few times, and that is you learn more in 15 minutes on the water than you do in 3 months in a laboratory. And so getting out there and actually doing this work, and for a boat person, that's critical, because that's not theoretical. That's really practical. And certainly, the theoretical knowledge base is important and it's critical to, developing thought over time. But getting out and actually doing stuff in the real world and being on the back deck of a boat staring at a wave that's taller than the boat certainly helps focus your thought process.
Well, I couldn't agree more. The analogy that I often use is, you could be the world's foremost expert in swimming and never have even put your toe in the water before. But what happens when you get kicked into the pool?
Yeah. Can
Can
you tread water?
can you swim? Right?
Yeah.
So it just goes to show how much application that conceptual knowledge, how much utility that actually has when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, so to speak. Well, this last question is a little bit more of an invitation. You have the time and the space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that's most in your mind and heart to share right now. Anything at all? Take your time. The floor is yours.
Well, that's a pretty deep question. If you don't start, you don't finish, right? And I've seen with a lot of folks who are coming up and through is they're afraid to get off the top dead center. And, you know, I need more data before I can make a decision. I need to have more information. The fear of failure. You know, if you're not falling down when you're water skiing, you're not trying hard enough. And the same thing when you're developing new technologies and trying to implement those technologies. You know, it may not work the first time, but did you learn something? And can you leverage that knowledge? And so, I worked for a gentleman years ago, was quite a successful individual, and he had a lot to do with who I am today. And I said, we spent a lot of money on these things, and he expected us to fail 50% of the time. We were in a real research environment, and we were looking for the bleeding edge, not the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge, and we were expected to fail. And so, you know, don't be scared of failure. You listen to some of the sports figures today. Roger Federer gave a great commencement speech when he talked about how many points he actually won. The same thing holds true in business and in engineering and development of technologies. If you're not failing a bunch of times, you're not pushing the boundaries and you're not trying to learn more. And so I can't tell you how often I've failed in my life, but it's a considerable number. And I learned a lot from that. And I would encourage anybody who is trying to build high developing teams, high performing teams, that you got to fail sometimes to learn those lessons. And I think that's a really important thing for people to remember.
Jim, an incredibly important message. I love it. If you don't start, you don't finish. I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here with me today. I've really gotten so much out of it, and I'm sure that whoever listens here is going to equally benefit from what you've shared. Thank you so much for being a guest today on the True Leadership Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ty. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.